Excellent. Let us now weave breath and heartbeat into this epic of castle warmth, transforming it from a list into a journey that immerses one in the chill of stone and the warmth of humanity, complete with its full historical context, the icy throne, the warm memory of a medieval castle. Imagine your fingertips touching not the smooth imitation stone of a film set, but the real walls of a castle. That cold is not the dry chill of a refrigerator, but a damp, bone-deep seep of cold from the very earth. Even in August, sunlight seems unable to penetrate the thick window embrasures, and the breath still frosts in the depths of the hall. This is not the warm home of fairy tales, but a beautiful yet cruel labyrinth built of stone and wind. Surviving here was a daily, silent thermodynamic war. Medieval people, with a subtlety and resilience we can scarcely imagine, transformed this ice house into a habitable fortress. Their wisdom wove a net of warmth stretching from the skin to the sky. Act 1. The faint spark and the precise ritual. When the last gleam of daylight was swallowed by the high windows, the true art of warming began. Metal braziers were carried in by servants. They were not crude lumps of iron, but portable suns for the interior cast from brass. The basin would glow with a honeyed light under the newly lit charcoal, and the engraved vines and heraldic beasts on its sides seemed to come alive in the leaping shadows. Tending the fire was a science. With long-handled tongs, a servant would carefully lay oak charcoal, burned for 3 full days in a kiln until it rang clear when struck. Upon the embers, the new coals would be silent at first, then emit a faint asterisk, crackle asterisk, splitting with a web of red fissures. A wave of warm, dry heat like an invisible ripple would begin slowly driving the chill from your knees. Yet an older, more primal warmth came from stone deep in the kitchen hearth. Several smooth, riverbed-gathered granite rocks had silently absorbed hours of fiery essence. When fetched, the air above them shimmered with heat. A seasoned maidservant would wrap one in a thick, rough-woven yet incredibly soft woolen felt, her movements as gentle as if swaddling an infant. Soon this captive warmth was delivered to an upper chamber, tucked deep into a feather bed. When you reached with freezing feet in the dead of night, you did not encounter searing heat, but a deep, enduring, almost living warmth, like the breath of the earth in slumber. Faithfully holding until dawn, Act 2. The alliance of bodies and the fortress of fabric. The cold was sharpest just before dawn. Then, the only reliable heat source was the body heat of others. The so-called bed was a tiny ecosystem built of wood, drapes, and human forms. The entire household, parents, children, even trusted servants and visiting kin, nestled together on a single, improbably wide pallet. This was not romance, but stark arithmetic. 8 sleeping bodies constituted a near-kilowatt biological power plant. Heavy woolen curtains hung from the 4 posts of the bed canopy, sealing tightly, trapping the moist warmth of exhaled breath and the heat radiating from skin within that dim, private world, a child's cheek pressed against a mother's warm shoulder blade. An elder's feet were warmed against a youth's calves. Here, rank and modesty quietly dissolved before survival. The symphony of snores, murmurs, and the rustle of fabric wove the most reassuring sound of the cold night. To rise was to leave this warm nest and step into the stone world's bite, so they armoured themselves with clothing against the skin went absorbent linen, soft as a second layer. Over that a woolen tunic or gown, its fibres trapping countless static warm air pockets. The outermost layer was a cloak heavy as armour, perhaps of coarse fulled wool, greased with tallow to repel weather, perhaps lined with fur, the soft belly fur of squirrel turned inward. They cinched belts tight, drew up hoods that wrapped the head, and tucked fingers into double-layered gloves. Soft leather inside, wool outside. The final step was to pull on leather boots stuffed with dry moss, over feet swaddled in thick woolen hose. Thus, a single person became a mobile, sealed, self-heating miniature fortress. Hash, 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 Act 3. The alchemy of space and the symbiotic current. Human bodies alone could not warm the entire space, so they reshaped the environment. Tapestries, those exquisite fabrics depicting hunts, battles, or biblical stories, were not primarily decoration. When servants hung them high with poles, covering entire walls from floor to vaulted ceiling, you felt the change at once. The xiaozhang de chuantang feng, insolent drafts, became hesitant whispers, sound softened, and most importantly, that dank cold that seemed to seep from the very marrow of the stone was held back by a soft yet firm barrier. At night, the heavy woolen bed curtains drawn around the four-poster created yet another, more intimate, warmer room within a room inside the frigid chamber. The castle's warmth also came from silent companions. A great mastiff might be called onto the bed, its massive body curled against human feet, its fur radiating a constant high heat. And beneath their feet, in the castle's undercroft, the stables and byres housed living creatures chewing cud and shifting in the dark the warm, spent air of their breath, rich with life's heat, seeped upward through floorboard cracks, unintentionally providing the most primitive underfloor heating for the cold chambers above. It was an ancient, intelligent symbiosis. Humans provided shelter and fodder. Livestock repaid with the most direct currency of living warmth. Hash, 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 Act 4. The inner flame and the rhythm of life. Warmth also had to be generated from within. Food and drink were the fuel for lighting the internal furnace. Daytime meals were never cold. Thick pea and meat stews bubbled in iron pots all day, their fatty fragrance mingling with rosemary and thyme, providing not just sustenance but long-burning calories. Drinks were always served warm, whether it was ale mulled with honey and spicy ginger, or hippocras, cheap wine boiled with a profusion of spices. A single cup sent a solid wave of heat spreading from the stomach to the limbs. Alcohol dilated blood vessels. Spices stimulated metabolism. This was not merely enjoyment, but a physiological strategy against damp and cold, yet a more lasting heat source than food was activity itself. In the castle, stillness meant rapid heat loss. Therefore, life was designed as a series of heat-generating rituals. In the morning, people deliberately stretched to dispel the stiffness of sleep by day. Maidservants spun thread or wove cloth, their arms swinging rhythmically. Craftsmen hammered metal, sparks and sweat flying together. Even the lord might practice swordsmanship in the hall or dance a vigorous step with his lady. These activities generated far more heat than huddling by a fire. Labour, dance, training, all were ways to transform life itself into a pulsing rhythm against the cold hash, 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 finale, the hearth, the heart of stone. Above all, ruling every memory of warmth, was the great central hearth. It was not an object in a room. It was the heart of the hall, a living, breathing entity built of stone. Its firebox was as deep as a cavern, capable of swallowing the trunk of a small tree. When lit, its flame produced not a gentle crackle, but a low, sustained roar, like the breath of a great beast. Heat radiated out in an almost tangible force, making the cheeks of someone standing 10 paces away feel the pressing warmth of its blast. Firelight danced beneath the high vaults, casting everyone's shadow, huge and distorted, onto tapestries and walls, like a troop of silent, warm ghosts. Here was the centre of all life. People cooked, ate, conversed, passed judgments, entertained, and slept within its ambit. Here, servants warmed stones, the lady warmed wine, a poet sang epics, and a wanderer begged a night's shelter. Its heat, through cunning design in the stone flues, was guided to warm upper chambers. Its light was the sole bulwark of faith against the dark and despair of the long night. That leaping flame was the unyielding, warm, beating heart in this world of cold stone. It did not merely heat air, it heated the soul, sustaining the fragile temperature of something called home and community. Therefore, warmth in a medieval castle was never what the modern mind understands as uniform room temperature. It was a dynamic, layered, highly strategic state of survival. It was the careful construction within a cold torrent of warm bubbles and islands using bodies, fabric, fire, food, labour and wisdom. It reminds us, warmth, in the most fundamental sense, is not a gift of technology, but the power of life itself, the collaboration of bodies, the movement of hands, the sharing of food and drink, the gathering around a common flame, and that indomitable desire to create a bit of comfort, a bit of shelter, in a harsh world that desire itself is the oldest and most enduring flame. Hash, 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 the icy throne, a medieval memory of warmth, a survival symphony of stone, fire, man, and life. It was not a building, but an organic, cold-fighting life system. Let us feel it from the depth of midnight hash, 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 hash movement. The core of night, the republic of body heat. When the last ember in the central hearth glowed dull red like a dying star, the castle sank into its truest, most naked state, a vast stone shell slowly losing heat. Then, the only effective weapon against the void-like cold was flesh and blood. The so-called bedchamber was often just a space in the hall, barely partitioned by heavy drapes. The bed was a thermodynamic republic constructed of oak, rope, feathers, and multiple bodies. There was no room for individualism. The lord, lady, their children, maidservants, even a trusted knight, lay down according to an unspoken thermodynamic constitution. The youngest and weakest were placed in the warm hinterland, encircled by adult warmth. The strongest slept at the edges, their backs forming a wall against the blade-like cold seeping through curtain gaps. The elderly were granted the honour of a central position, for their blood needed the most guardianship. You could hear this republic breathe, a tapestry of varying depths, interwoven with soft snores, murmurs, and the unconscious, minute friction of bodies beneath woolen blankets. Heat was shared, circulated, and stored here selflessly. The feather mattress was not for luxury, but as superb insulation, separating the body from the icy world below. The weight of layer upon layer of wool and linen blankets was itself a comforting warm confinement. A more ingenious heating device often curled at the foot of the bed, a massive mastiff. Its humid exhalations and the constant furnace-like heat radiating from its fur were prized natural gifts. In this fragile ecosystem sustained by human warmth, animals were equal contributors of thermal energy. This was the most primal truth of a castle's winter night. Survival begins with the closest solidarity. Loneliness here was a physical danger. Hash, 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 hash. Movement 2, the battle at dawn. Ignite, move, encase. Daybreak, leaving the bedding, was an act of betrayal requiring courage. The cold clamped on like armour instantly. Thus the day's battle commenced, a complex, precise ritual of warming. Step 1, ignite the miniature sun. The servant brought in the brazier, that portable star of brass or iron. Last night's carefully banked coals were rekindled, fed with new, clean-burning hardwood charcoal. The brazier was not just a heat source, it was a focal point people dressed, conferred, began their day around it. Its radiant heat had a limited range, yet it created a small, survivable climate before you. Your hands reached for it, your face flushed in its glow, while behind you stretched the vast, watchful chill. Step 2, make the body a furnace. Stillness meant cold, therefore the castle morning was full of deliberate motion. A maidservant vigorously shook out a tapestry, raising fine dust. A page boy ran with messages and items. The cook kneaded dough with force. Even the lord might pace the hall or engage in mild swordplay. This was not leisure, but necessary calisthenics for survival. To speed the blood, make the muscles generate heat, to ignite oneself from within. Step 3. Build a mobile fortress. Next, they encased themselves in fabric, teeth included. The order of dressing was itself a science. 1 linen undershirt, the first line of defence. Tai shen, close to the skin, wicking away moisture, keeping the skin dry. 2. Woolen tunic, kirtle, the main insulating layer. Within the rough, warm wool fibres were locked millions of static air molecules, nature's finest insulation. 3. Overtunic and cloak, the final defence. Perhaps a thick surcoat or a heavy hooded cloak. The most luxurious were lined with fur, squirrel marten, lamb, not just a status symbol but the ultimate physical barrier. They cinched their waists with belts, fastened cloaks with brooches, ensuring not a wisp of warm air could easily escape. 4. The battle for the extremities. Double-layered gloves, soft leather inside, wool outside, leather boots stuffed with dry moss or wool, and headscarves or hoods wrapped tightly. They knew well how swiftly heat was lost from the head. When a person completed these steps, they were no longer merely a person, but a self-sufficient, slowly moving microcastle, carrying its own heat reserve and insulating walls, ready to step into the stone hall's vast wasteland. Movement 3, the alchemy of day, transforming the environment. Man could not warm the whole space by himself, so they worked environmental magic. The truth about tapestries, those lavish wall hangings depicting heroic epics or religious scenes, were first and foremost insulation and only secondly art. Hung from the high walls, they formed a dense, warm layer of dead air. Running a finger over the cold stone, then touching the tapestry's back, you felt an immediate temperature jump. They absorbed radiant heat from the hearth and released it slowly, making the walls themselves more friendly. The secret of the floor, the stone floor, was eternal ice. So, it was strewn with rushes, thyme or rosemary for fragrance and insect repellents, then covered with pelts and carpets. Walking upon it, footsteps grew muffled and the rise of chill from the soles was greatly delayed. The trap for light and heat. Windows were beautiful traitors, letting in light and cold. The countermeasure was layered defence. Innermost heavy wool curtains. In the middle, perhaps oiled linen or treated sheep bladder, a primitive transparent pane. Outermost, the heavy wooden shutters. In winter, a window was less a lookout than a heat-leaking breach needing strict sealing. The nesting of spaces, functional separation of castle rooms forced constant movement between different thermal climate zones. From the icy chapel to the warm kitchen, to the Kiju Jiao Luo living corner, locally heated by a brazier, this forced migration inadvertently prevented the body from succumbing to the deep chill of prolonged exposure to a single low temperature. Life became a beneficial shuttle between temperature gradients. Movement Y4, the inner sacred flame, food and communal drink. Warmth also had to be generated from within. Eating and drinking were the ritual for igniting the inner sacred flame. Soup and stew were the daily foundation. A massive iron cauldron hung over the kitchen fire, bubbling all day. Its contents might be coarse: barley, beans, root vegetables, bony meat chunks, but the thick broth was rich in calories and fat. The very process of digesting it was an hours-long slow simmer within the body. Spices were precious thermal catalysts: black pepper, ginger, cinnamon. The heat they brought was not just on the tongue. Modern science knows some of these compounds slightly raise metabolic rate and promote circulation. For medieval people, this was the tangible magic of feeling a warm current reaching the limbs, the eternal warm drink. Cold water was rarely drunk directly in winter. Its substitutes were small beer, a very low-alcohol fermented drink, heated mead, or the famed Hippocras thin, cheap wine diluted with water, loaded with honey and pungent spices and boiled. This was a personal bonfire lit in the stomach several times a day. People sipped these warm liquids, like constantly feeding the internal furnace, and communal drinking was a social heat source more important than the food itself. At day's end, people gathered around the largest hearth, passing a single earthenware jug of mulled wine. They shared not just the drink, but stories, laughter, and the comfort of mutual affirmation of existence during the endless night. This psychological warmth was sometimes more crucial than the physical hash finale. The heart and totem, the central hearth. Above all, ruling everything was the great hall's central hearth. It was not a household fixture. It was the castle's heart, totem, and social core. Its scale inspired awe. The firebox was often as deep and wide as a small closet, large enough for a person to stand in. What burned was not mere logs, but entire tree trunks. When the fire roared, it produced a low, thunderous rumble, its light illuminating the soaring roof, casting everyone's shadow, huge and distorted, upon the stone walls like a solemn drama of light and shadow. Here was the stage for all of life. Cooking happened beside it. Meals were laid before it. Law was pronounced here. Music was played. Guests were received. Alms were given to the poor. Everyone, from the lord to the lowliest servant, found their place within the reach of its radiance and heat. Its warmth was guided by architectural design. The massive stone chimney itself was a great thermal mass, slowly releasing energy. More cunning designs might cause the flue to wind through the walls of adjacent rooms during its ascent, performing the most primitive heat exchange. But the hearth's most important quality was its symbolic meaning. As long as the hearth fire burned, the castle was alive. It was the eternal beacon against the outer dark, whether of night or of winter. People gazed into the flames as into life itself, leaping, fragile, needing constant feeding, yet incredibly tenacious. Hash. Conclusion. The philosophy of survival. Thus, warmth in a medieval castle was never a given, but a continuous, active, multi-layered creation. It was a precise system that fully integrated the individual, clothing, activity, diet, the interpersonal, shared sleep, shared drink, technology, braziers, hearths, architecture, and nature, animals, fabric, the thermal properties of stone. No single technology within it was decisive, but their superposition and complementarity constructed an astonishing low-tech survival system. It reveals the profound wisdom, extreme pragmatism, and deep social cooperation displayed by pre-modern humans facing extreme environments. Ultimately, it reminds us, warmth, in its most essential sense, does not come from some external appliance, but from life's own strategies, collaborations, and unceasing desire for heat. Those who sat around the fire in icy stone halls, who shared a blanket, who passed the wineskin, they preserved far more than body temperature. They preserved that tiny, precious flame of civilization in the cold night. Hash. Complete historical context and background. The evocative narrative above accurately captures the multifaceted struggle for warmth in a medieval stone castle, c. 11th to 15th centuries, particularly in Northern Europe. To ground this sensory journey in historical reality, here is the consolidated background that informs its every detail. 1. The architectural reality, why castles were so cold, * stone construction. Stone has high thermal mass. It absorbs cold and heat slowly and releases it slowly. In winter, castle walls, often several feet thick, became reservoirs of cold that constant small fires could never fully negate. They also wicked heat away from the body through conduction *. Windows. Glazing was rare and extremely expensive, using small, thick panes of crown glass or flattened animal horn oiled cloth. Most windows were narrow arrow slits or larger openings covered by wooden shutters. They were primary sources of heat loss and drafts size and airflow. Great halls had high ceilings for status and to disperse smoke. Creating vast volumes of air to heat doors were ill-fitting, and ventilation was necessary for fires, creating constant air exchange with the frigid outside too. The hierarchy of heat-warmth was a luxury distributed according to social rank, a tangible marker of status asterisk. The lord and family had access to the central hearth, private chambers, sometimes with fireplaces by the late Middle Ages, the best furs, warmed beds and personal braziers asterisk, retainers and guards, slept in the hall near the hearth or in barracks, relying on shared body heat and whatever warmth radiated from the central fire asterisk servants, often slept in kitchens for residual heat, corridors or unheated outbuildings. Their warmth depended almost entirely on clothing, activity and huddling together through the science and symbolism of fire asterisk. Fuel, wood was the primary fuel, but in densely populated areas it became scarce and regulated. The preferred clean fuel was charcoal, as mentioned, which burned hotter and with less smoke than wood. Peat was used in some regions. The great trunk in the central hearth was a display of wealth and control over resources asterisk. The hearth as legal and social centre. The hearth was not just for warmth. It was the symbolic and literal centre of the household. Important transactions were sealed before it. Oaths were sworn by it. Hospitality was defined by sharing its warmth. Extinguishing the hearth fire could symbolize the dissolution of a household for clothing the primary defense. The narrative's detailed description of layering is historically precise, asterisk linen, worn next to the skin for hygiene, to absorb sweat and prevent chafing from wool asterisk, wool, the superstar of medieval insulation. Wool fibres trap air, and even when wet retain some insulating properties. Different weaves, fine worsted, coarse-fulled, serve different purposes. Asterisk, fur, the ultimate status symbol and insulator. Ermine, squirrel and vair, squirrel belly fur, were highly prized laws, sumptuary laws, often restricted the wearing of certain furs to the nobility asterisk, practical design. Hoods, mittens and cloaks were essential. The dagged, cut into decorative points, edges on late medieval clothing may have originated in practical attempts to shed water. 5 shared sleeping, a matter of necessity. The thermodynamic republic was the norm, not the exception. Beds were enormous by modern standards, and it was common for family, guests, and servants to share privacy, in our modern sense, was virtually non-existent. This practice was rooted in practicality, warmth, security, and reflected a more communal concept of the household's 6 animals as technology. Using dogs for warmth and recognizing the ambient heat from stables is well attested in literature and accounts. Animals were integral parts of the domestic ecosystem, providing services beyond labour, milk or meat 7 diet as fuel. The medieval diet in winter was calorie-dense for a reason. Fats from meat, dairy, oily fish, and complex carbohydrates from grains and legumes provided slow-burning energy. The widespread use of spices, while a sign of wealth, also had a practical side in making preserved, often monotonous food more palatable and in creating a sensation of inner heat. Mulled wines and ales were indeed standard for all ages, as the fermentation boiling process made them safer to drink than water and provided calories 8, the constant battle versus the once and done myth. The key takeaway, beautifully illustrated in the narrative, is that medieval heating was inefficient and localized. There was no concept of central heating. Warmth existed in pockets, around a fire, under a heap of furs, within a huddle of people. Life involved constantly moving between these pockets, managing one's personal insulation and generating heat through motion. It was an active, ongoing engagement with the environment, not a passive enjoyment of a controlled climate. This system was a brilliant adaptive response to extreme conditions, showcasing human ingenuity in the face of material constraints. It reinforces that the castle was not a passively hostile space, but an environment actively lived in and fought for through a sophisticated understanding of the body, materials, and social bonds.
Night deepens. You might think fire is the only sun in a castle, but what truly governs warmth is time, a whole survival system that runs by the hour. Who adds fuel? Who closes the shutters? Who clears ash from the flue? Who moves damp wool blankets closer to the glow? Who stuffs sold linen into or cracks? Winter in a castle is not a season, it is an institution. Warmth is not a state, it is an order constantly maintained and always on the brink of collapse. Stand in the center of the great hall and look up at the high trusses and soot-minus polished beams, and you understand the price of nobility. High vaults let smoke disperse so people do not choke, but they also exile heat to places human bodies cannot reach. The warmth that truly belongs to people lingers below the knees. Fire touches shoes, hems, and hands first. Faces and chests receive only passing waves of heat, more like charity than generosity. You realize people gathered around the fire not because they loved company, but because company itself produced heat. Builders pressed together, knees touching knees, even arguments forced blood to flow faster. Step back, just 2 or 3 paces from the fire and stone pulls you back to reality. It does not merely feel cold, it draws heat out, like a silent sponge. Touch the wall and your back feels pressed against a frozen river. Step away and the air mocks the warmth you thought you felt. Thus arose the oldest rule of interior design: never sit against the wall if you can avoid it. Benches were pulled slightly inward. Tapestries were stretched tight. Crates, sacks, and clutter were piled along walls, not storage alone, but insulation. The air smells of smoke, tallow, damp wood, sweat, wet wool, hay, and sour breath. To modern noses it offends, but then it meant life. Cleanliness required light, water, and ventilation, luxuries castles could not afford. Instead, people chose function over purity. Herbs like rosemary, thyme, and wormwood were scattered on floors so footsteps released fragrance. Beeswax, candles, and pine torches sweetened the air with bitterness and resin. Hot wine and spices drove cold back down the throat. In a castle, even smell was part of warmth. Fire was never simply lit. It had temperament. It demanded feeding and discipline. Too strong, and smoke descended like a black blanket. The weak and damp cold returned like a tide across the floor. Those who tended fire understood its language. Wood must be dry. Charcoal must be layered, not smothered. Air must be allowed in, bringing cold with it. Heat was always an exchange. Traded wood, air, smoke, and labor for warmth. Climbing the narrow stairs upward, temperature drops with every step. The stairwell is a vertical wind tunnel. Cold accelerates here. Hands on stone go numb instantly. Wall niches reveal where torches once burned, not for light, but for survival. Upper chambers warm, or private and colder. Privacy meant distance from fire. Only late in the Middle Ages did private fireplaces appear. Even then, fireplaces warmed only half a body. Knees burned while backs froze. This is why chairs were high-backed, cloaks worn indoors, feet lifted, bodies turned sideways. The bed was the real room. Pull back the curtains and smell feathers, wool, human heat, animal heat. The darkness inside felt safe. Luxury was not gold, but isolation. From -posture beds were dense for heat. Blankets were layered for thickness, not softness. Thickness trapped air. Trapped air preserved warmth. Hot stones, copper bottles, and warming pans helped, but nothing replaced another living body. Children, partners, servants, dogs, they were heat sources. Solitude was dangerous. Communal sleep was not intimacy, it was survival. Day decided the battle. People migrated like birds between thermal islands, kitchens, bakeries, laundries, forges. The cruel truth was simple: the warmest places belonged to the hardest labor. Cooks, washerwomen, blacksmiths lived closest to fire. Nobles owned better clothes, not warmer rooms. Kitchens were brutal furnaces. Boiling pots, splattering fat, steam, sweat. Leave to quickly adapt, clothing turned cold instantly. Thus medieval people learned a paradox: stay dry even in heat. When absorbed sweat, wool was earned slowly. Socks were changed. Dryness was health. Cold and illness were inseparable. That meant coughs, joint pain, sores. Smoke meant bad eyes and lungs. Crowding meant lice and disease. Medicine was scarce, experience ruled. Soups, stews, and thick broths were essential. Warm drinks flowed constantly. Spices were edible embers, thrown into wine and ale. Warmth became power. Who sat near the fire mattered. Position was hierarchy measured in degrees. To sit by the door was not just lower status, it was colder duty. Etiquette was thermal politics. Yet castles adapted. Better chimneys, thicker doors, more tapestries, double curtains. Every hiding cloth was a victory over stone. In the worst weeks of winter, castles became ships in ice. Movement shrank. People clustered. Stories, songs, and arguments multiplied. These were not distractions, they were psychological heat. Fire warmed skin. Where it's warmed well. Castles defended against enemies but also against sunlight. Thick walls blocked warmth as well as danger. People chased south-facing rooms like treasure. Sunlit corners became gold. Slowly, these desires changed architecture. Thicker windows, better glass, private fireplaces. Warmth shifted from communal hall to personal room. Modernity began in blankets and chimneys. Yet here, in this midnight memory, the castle remains a beast of stone and people. Footsteps echo in corridors. The wind carries snow through cracks. Breathing synchronizes under heavy covers. They did not tolerate cold, they understood heat. Warmth was territory reclaimed daily. Home was not temperature. Home was shared heat. The castle was cold enough to strip Romans bare. But because it was cold, fire became faith. Crowding became mercy. Sharing became civilization itself.